Hello, this is Christina. Welcome to Make Something Small, my art journey in pattern design, illustration, and lettering. This week I'm going to share the illustrations for my next calendar in progress. I'm keeping the Winter Without Snow theme, specifically Winter in the South. This is a screenshot from Procreate showing the ones that I have gotten finished and the thumbnails that I quickly drew out to show the ones that I need to still draw. I am using finished in quotes because I'm going to go back to each one and see if what I can do to make each of them better before uploading to the calendar. And we are going to start with the January time lapse. It's going to start with me drawing out the thumbnail. So this was just a really rough sketch that I started with the idea, and you'll see that I change it around a lot. The idea are pine cones and some pine needles in the corner of the square. I did frames on each one, but not all of them will show the frames. I used a couple of stamps of the pine cones, but I didn't really like them. And you'll see that I later end up using a photo to help me with this. I started out with drawing the pine cones and putting in, or the pine straw rather, and putting in the pine cone stamps, but I just didn't like how it looked. I wasn't happy with it at all. I tried using different overlays, different textures. It wasn't really giving me what I wanted. I added in one of my rain textures in the background, and then I used a photo of a pine cone and pine needles to trace over and color in. I'm starting with the light colors first, then adding in some shadows. I'm blending them out, blending out the shadows. I really had to trust the process here because I started out not liking this either. Once I finished with the pine cone, I started in with the pine needles with a dark green. I topped them off with a lighter green to try to show some dimension and depth. It started out as my water drops background, and then I just added in some color and did some noise. And then I reduced some of the opacity for that background. I duplicated the lettering and colored it white and then placed it in the background. Now this is my February time lapse. I started out once again with a really loose sketch as a thumbnail. This is an egret near some water with a tree, and of course it is winter, so that tree doesn't have any leaves, but there's pine trees over in the background. I started out with coloring in the water with this deep blue or green blue and a gray background because the sky is gray and the sun is this bright ball shining through the fog. That's the idea. That's kind of the ambiance I was trying to go for. I started out trying to do a yellow sun showing behind the fog, but I, again, was not very happy with it. I tried doing the bloom, I tried doing some different things, and I just ended up not being very happy with it. I decided to pause on the sun for a little while and work on the pine trees in the back. You'll see me erase these a lot because I was not happy with really any of them. I work on the pine trees off and on a lot, and then what I ended up doing eventually is making a stamp for the trees so that I could take my time doing the trees, and then I used the stamp to continue the trees. I'm putting like this line of rocks that is supposed to be like in the middle of this lake. This is basically a picture of my backyard, and I'm going to be tracing over this tree that is in my backyard. So that is where the tree came from this time. I don't know if you can tell, I did add some texture to the tree. Now I'm using another stock photo to make the heron, or rather the egret, and the grass in the water. I darkened up the water with a little bit more blue, and I'm going to expand that background going all the way across the back. And then I also added another little strip of what is supposed to be a group of rocks out in the lake. I put some greenery in the background and kind of smudged it a little. That's supposed to be like more trees in the background, and I'm still continually trying to draw these trees with the leaves or the needles in different directions. I duplicated the grasses to put some around the tree. One of the things I am thinking about doing is coming back into this one and adding in some rocks. You also see where I made the sun to just be white instead of yellow. So now this is just a shining sun coming through the fog. The lettering is my own handwriting, and then I go back through with a circle to make sure that everything is the same kind of a size as far as the width of the loops. Anything that could be a loop, I use the circle for, and then I go back over it with a dual brush for the lettering. I also duplicated it and also did a white background for it to have like a highlight behind it. Now for the trees in the back, this is where I was using my stamp brush that I made. I did light taps for some to make them a little bit more translucent, heavier taps for others, and then I also made some of them taller and some of them smaller. I duplicated the trees and then flipped them so that I would have a reflection, and then I also did the same thing for the sun so that I would have a little bit of a light reflection on the water. And this is the March illustration. Again, I started out with the thumbnail and the sketch. This was originally going to have some flowers at the front of it. I may go back in and add some flowers. This is a pine tree forest. You see I started out with the background and added in some gray clouds, and then I did the pine trees. This is the pine tree stamp again that I made. Smaller ones in the background, larger ones in the front. I added in some more clouds in the background. This is just another wintry, cloudy day in the south. I did the same thing with the lettering. I wrote it out in cursive, and you see me using the loops to make sure that everything is a similar size, and so that when I go around it with the dual brush, I make sure that everything looks nice. Everything is wide spaced and isn't pushed together too much. You can see that like with the H, how I went over the loop instead of where I'd originally drawn the H. And this is the April time lapse. Starting again with a sketch. This is more of a bayou scene, is the idea of foggy bayou trees with air moss. Or it could be called Spanish moss as well. I used this photo as a reference, and I went in for the tree on the side, a little bit of the bank on the side, and then the air moss kind of flowing downward. The texture that I put in on the moss actually came from a photo that I took outside of my house of a little piece of the moss, and I used that texture in order to make this texture brush. I made the sky gray again in the background with the water a blue-green, and then I used this other photo to put trees in the background. So these are like trees that are in the middle of a swamp. None of them really have branches, none of them really have any leaves. They're just kind of stumps and trees poking up out of the water. You can see the background is very foggy. I did put another shoreline in the background as well to show an ending for this water. And I put a outline or a silhouette of the egret this time instead of coloring it in like I did in the last one. Now my husband says that the background trees don't look right. So I don't know what else to do with them. If you have any suggestions on changing them or making them look different, please let me know. I can always go back in and re-sketch them. Again, I'm also thinking of putting something on the land in the foreground, both of the little banks that are kind of showing, that look kind of like they're covered with moss a little bit. Maybe put a little bit more texture on them or a little bit more grass. I'm not really sure. The whole idea is that it's supposed to be a foggy bayou scene. Now for May, what I did, these are magnolia leaves, and I started out again with the sketch, but then what I did was I went in to where I made the magnolia leaves for the patterns that I just finished, and I copied and pasted these two different colors, these two sets of magnolia leaves, into this new screen, into this new file. And so then after I did that, I drew in the other little leaf sprouts that went around to like make an arrangement. So I colored them in with a different color green. I did put the frame around this one that I originally drew in on the thumbnails and colored it in. I used a filter then on the magnolia leaves, on some of them to make them a little bit darker, and then I'm changing some of the lines that I had on them. I'm going to be using some filters on this too. I added in the raindrop background that I made, the raindrop background texture that I made for my patterns. And then on this one, for the month, I am using a curved line or a curved template. This is June. This is a camellia with leaves, and this is my thumbnail sketch. And so I took this picture and I made it black and white so that the colors wouldn't interfere with what I was trying to do. I already knew the colors that I wanted to use. And so I traced over the petals first. I started with the petals and the buds. And then I went in with some of the leaves. I didn't try to do all of the leaves with a dark green. Then once I did that, I turned off the photo and I started to color in the camellia flowers with a pink and with a yellow center. I started out on this first camellia. You see me making little tiny lines around the different petals. I'm going to change that up in a minute, and I'll explain what I did when I get there. So I jumped ahead to where I started coloring in the other camellia flowers. And you see where on the first one I had used all those little tiny lines to go around the edges of the petals? Well, in this second one, I decided I liked the look of some thicker lines, more spread apart. And so that is what I decided to go with, was the thicker lines. So later on, I go back, I do both of these camellias that way with the thicker lines, a little bit more spread apart, in the dark pink with a white kind of an accent. I do that with both of these, and then I'm going to go back to the first camellia and redo those with different lines. I colored in the leaves with a dark green, and then I outlined them in a lighter green. At first I was just going to fill them in and not have any kind of line work on the outside, but that was really hard for me to see where one leaf ended and the other began, especially when they overlapped. So I still ended up doing the line work, but then what I did was I used a filter on it to make the line work a little bit of a darker green, so that I could see it a little bit better, but I also felt like it made the illustration pop a little bit more. I ended up making that top leaf one great big leaf instead of two separate leaves. I wasn't sure how to fill in this curved leaf to make it look right with the lines, and I'm trying different lines and different stripes and just trying to do different things to make it look similar to the other leaves. I'm using the border on this one as well, except this one I have colored in the border with a dark teal and made the outside of the border a lighter teal color. I am also now using filters to go through the leaves to see what they look like with the different filters. Now I'm working on July. This is again supposed to be like a river with egrets in the water. It's a gray, foggy atmosphere. This one is going to have the water flowing out to like a misty horizon. I have the white sun again that I did using a white circle, and then I used the bloom to make it get brighter. For the water, I'm using different shades of green teal. For the water, I'm using different shades of green teal to kind of make a difference in the dimensions. I'm going to add in some green as well, because this is supposed to be like river water or bayou water, so it's kind of a bluish green. I've got the egrets are standing on some land or standing in some water. I'm using a little bit of white for some highlight on some waves. But then I'm going to use a stamp as well, a texture stamp that I'm going to cover over to make the waves and the water look more like a current flowing. And then I started out making some grasses around the egrets, around the birds, but then I decided to use this photo again, but instead of just making them grasses, I'm going to actually make these little water reeds with the tops, and draw those on to be in the water this time around the birds. I had to do it over again because I realized I had drawn on the wrong layer, and I had to do it over again to draw on the correct layer. I duplicated the reeds that I drew and placed them around the egrets. I'm almost finished with July. I just need to do the lettering and add some more texture and maybe some rocks to this beach area. What are you working on this week? Let me know in the comments, and if you have an Instagram or a YouTube channel, let me know so I can follow you. Thank you for watching Make Something Small. Remember that new videos post every Friday. If you would like to follow my journey in learning illustration, lettering, and pattern design, please subscribe. That's all I have for this week. I'll see you next time, and remember that every big project starts with something small.